I inherited a decommissioned lighthouse from an uncle I barely knew, along with one handwritten note taped inside the door: keep the light running every night, no matter what, even though it's not connected to any power grid anymore. I thought it was a harmless eccentric request. Then I spent one night there without turning it on. My great-uncle Simon died without immediate family, and somehow, through a distant paperwork trail nobody fully explained to me, I ended up inheriting his old decommissioned lighthouse on a rocky stretch of the Maine coast. The property had been automatically taken off the Coast Guard's active registry decades earlier, replaced by a modern automated buoy system somewhere offshore. When I first went to see it, I found a note taped inside the entrance door, clearly written by Simon himself: keep the light running every single night, without exception, even though the lighthouse no longer had any official function or power connection to the grid. He'd apparently maintained it himself for over 30 years using an old generator, at his own expense, for reasons the note didn't explain. I assumed it was simply an old man's harmless attachment to a job he'd once done professionally. I decided to stay a few nights before deciding whether to sell the property, and I kept the generator running exactly as instructed, mostly out of respect for a relative I regretted never really knowing. The first nights. For the first 2 nights, nothing unusual happened. I kept the old light rotating faithfully, slept reasonably well, and started genuinely considering just keeping the property as a strange, peaceful getaway rather than selling it. On the 3rd night, the generator ran out of fuel earlier than expected, and by the time I noticed, refueling would have meant walking down a steep, poorly lit path in the dark to reach the storage shed. Exhausted and slightly annoyed at what felt like an unnecessary superstition, I decided to skip it for just one night, telling myself Simon's note was almost certainly nothing more than old habit rather than any real necessity. Around 11 p.m., with the light dark for the first time in decades, I heard something scraping steadily against the outside of the tower, slow and rhythmic, circling the structure at what sounded like the exact height of the lantern room itself, far above ground level, in a spot nothing should have been able to reach without climbing equipment. I told myself it was wind, or loose shutters, or seabirds nesting somewhere in the tower's exterior. The sound continued for nearly an hour, never speeding up, never stopping, methodically circling the tower at that same impossible height. What I saw. Unable to sleep, I finally looked out the small window near my bed, facing the rocky shoreline below. In the moonlight, I could see the water clearly, calm and undisturbed, nothing unusual on the visible shore or waves. Then, near the base of the tower itself, directly below where the scraping sound seemed to originate from far above, I saw movement, a shape emerging slowly from the water, tall and impossibly thin, moving with a strange, deliberate stillness between each small motion, as though it were pausing to make sure it hadn't yet been noticed. It stood at the base of the tower for what felt like several minutes, motionless, facing upward toward the dark lantern room exactly the way you'd look toward a light you expected to see but didn't. I didn't move from the window. I don't know if it saw me watching, or if it simply didn't care whether I did. Eventually, it turned and walked back into the water, sinking beneath the surface without any splash or disturbance at all, as smoothly as it had first appeared. The next morning, I refueled the generator immediately at first light and kept the beam running continuously after that, refusing to let it go dark again for even a single hour, regardless of how tired or inconvenienced I became. I drove into the nearest town and asked around carefully about the lighthouse's history, eventually finding an elderly fisherman who'd known my great-uncle personally. He told me, somewhat reluctantly, that Simon had never fully explained why he kept maintaining an officially decommissioned light, only that he'd once mentioned, after a few too many drinks one evening, that the light wasn't actually for guiding ships anymore. He said Simon believed the light was keeping something offshore from coming any closer than the base of the tower, not guiding sailors safely past danger, but keeping a specific danger contained to the water itself, patient and waiting, only approaching the shore on nights when the light happened to fail. I asked him if he believed that. He said he'd stopped questioning it decades ago, after personally witnessing, one foggy night as a much younger man, exactly the kind of shape I'd already described without prompting him first. Living there now. I decided to keep the lighthouse after that conversation, maintaining the same nightly commitment Simon had kept for over 30 years, refueling the generator religiously, never again allowing the light to go dark for any reason. Most nights are uneventful now. Occasionally, especially during storms or particularly foggy evenings, I still hear faint scraping somewhere near the tower's upper exterior, and I've learned not to investigate directly, keeping my attention instead on ensuring the light continues rotating steadily through until dawn. I've come to understand, slowly and reluctantly, why Simon never fully explained his reasoning to anyone, and why he chose to maintain this responsibility alone for so many decades rather than warning anyone else about what it actually involved. Some responsibilities are easier to carry quietly than to explain convincingly to someone who hasn't already seen proof themselves. I don't know what would happen if the light ever failed permanently, with nobody present to notice or refuel it in time. I've made arrangements, just in case, ensuring someone will eventually inherit this same responsibility from me the way I inherited it from Simon, along with a note explaining, as clearly as I finally can, exactly why the light must never go dark. Some lighthouses aren't built to guide ships safely toward shore. Some of them exist purely to keep something patient, and thin, and impossibly still, from finally deciding the water isn't close enough anymore.